Do you think we have the capabilities or anywhere near close capabilities to get us to Mars, maybe in our lifetimes?
Yes, I do think that in our lifetime, for you and I, our generation, humans will be on Mars. I actually think it might happen quicker than some folks expect.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC10X podcast. And today we have Jonathan Lacoste with us. Jonathan is the founder and general partner at SpaceVC. He is an active advisor to space startups globally, serving as board of directors, advising prospective entrepreneurs and international space agencies. Previously, Jonathan was the founder of an enterprise software company called Jebbit in the digital experience and data infrastructure space. The company raised over $90 million over the course of its lifetime and worked with a large portion of Fortune 500 companies before a successful exit. In this episode, we talk about the origin story of space VC, investing in the space sector, major opportunity areas within space, being an investor in SpaceX. Will we get to Mars in our lifetimes? How will the space sector evolve in the next 5 to 10 years? And a lot more. So, without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. Hey, Jonathan, so good to have you on the VC10X podcast. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. So to start things off, can we have your story and how you started investing, like that journey from building Zebit to now investing in the space sector?
Yeah. My personal story, real quick. I grew up in Ohio in the Midwest. I went to school in Boston, Boston College and Harvard, met some classmates, and we started playing around with this idea to make advertising more interactive. We hated sitting through pre-roll video ads on YouTube. One thing led to another. We won the business plan competition. We dropped out of college, and we spent the next 10 years building that company. Kind of morphed over time and became more of an enterprise software data infrastructure play. But learned a lot from that experience, and we sold the company and had a really positive exit. But at the same time, I had always been extremely passionate about commercial space. I think the first time I ever did a TV interview on CNBC, it was supposed to be about enterprise software, and I still snuck in some thoughts about space. I was visiting the SpaceX facility in Hawthorne with friends who had worked there. I was spending nights and weekends talking to students and professors at Stanford and Harvard that were studying in the space ecosystem. So intellectually, for me, space has always been where I was fascinated. But I think what really was the light bulb moment was over the last few years, as my Jebbit journey was ending, I realized two things. One was how misunderstood space was from an investment standpoint, and two, realizing that space technologies were now actually venture scale. Previously, space was not a great area for venture capital investment, but that was quickly changing. And those were some of the reasons that got me excited to jump in.
Absolutely. That's pretty exciting. So seems you were always excited about space, and once you had that exit, it was like just the right moment for you to take that jump and start investing into space companies, right?
Exactly. As a former founder, I just love helping other founders and entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of different mechanisms to do that. But one of the best ways I felt in the space ecosystem, given there are so many first time founders, was to build a venture capital fund. So that's what Space VC is. Obviously, it's an early stage venture capital fund investing in space and space adjacent startups.
Right, absolutely. And the next question I would like to ask you is like, why is space a great industry or a great sector to invest in? And what are some major themes that are within the space sector that are exciting to you?
Yeah, I think space is misunderstood because when folks think about investing in space, their mind immediately goes to what they're aware of and they see in the headlines. So that might be rocket launch, that might be deep space exploration, that might be lunar missions, Martian missions, asteroid mining. These are actually things that we don't invest in at all. So we don't invest in deep space exploration or space tourism or science experiments. Space, the massive themes that we're really excited about is actually the closer integration between enterprise and consumer tech stacks and space infrastructure. So if you think about that from a communications or an internet connectivity standpoint, if you think about that from a tracking and optimizing the physical world around us, GPS, weather, these are all space-based technologies, but we don't necessarily realize that as consumers. And so one of the themes we're investing in is the commingling, the closer integration between space technologies and the enterprise tech stack, but also in the role of government. The role of government in space is rapidly changing from the builder end user and customer to only the end customer. And so a lot of our investments are really in things that government used to be responsible for that commercial industry can actually build in a more nimble way. So we're really excited about investing in things like that. I also think, you know, events of modern day, whether it's the Ukrainian conflict or whether it's the really unfortunate series of earthquakes that just hit Turkey, we're seeing that space is part of a sovereign nation's communications and multi-layered resiliency, from being able to have citizens communicate with each other, to be able to have access to the internet, having infrastructure on the ground. Obviously, terrestrially, it might be easier to get up and going, but it is vulnerable to these types of conflicts and devastating events. And so space is also where a lot of nations are looking to put additional infrastructure, so that they have a backup option, a backup plan, as things like this happen.
Absolutely, yeah. And like very rightly said, that events like the Ukrainian war, and we saw that SpaceX was dispatching those internet things so that internet can still function, and that's a great value add for people of that country, because at that time of turmoil, you need to get your voice out and you need to get heard by the world, right? Otherwise, it's just kind of an echo chamber. You're stuck there and nobody knows what's happening there, right? So that is one good example of what space technologies can enable. And I'd like to understand what are the major opportunity areas within space, maybe which are coming up, or there is a big market there where we need more innovation, or where founders who are interested in space can maybe start companies in those areas.
One area that's particularly of interest to us is in what's called the downstream geospatial segment. So what that means is there's a lot of satellites in space that collect different types of remote sensing or Earth observation data. This might be a particular sensor, infrared, hyperspectral, multi-wave, or it might be an optical image, a camera for all intents and purposes, right? Or radar-based solutions. These different sensors and cameras can tell us a lot about the physical world, how it's changing, what's happening, how we can optimize business and national security around it. And one of the things we are extremely bullish on is this notion that generally businesses and countries have been optimizing and making decisions without significant amount of Earth observation data. And the question becomes, when you have better access to EO data, what does that enable you to do that you couldn't do before? And so there's a lot of investment that has gone into the actual constellation side, the hardware in space that's collecting the data. The opportunity that we see is the downstream segment. So once you have data, the pre-processing, the geo-rectifying, even the sat tasking up front in terms of essentially placing your order, data fusion amongst multiple different data sets. So maybe you want to take radar and hyperspectral or optical and infrared and fuse it together. And then the actual integration layer of taking that and putting it into an end application. Ultimately, it's our view that enterprises and consumers don't want a satellite image most of the time. They want the answers that that image or that data set can tell them about. So if you're an insurance provider and you need to send a claim to a customer whose house has been hurt in a wildfire, or you want real-time satellite imagery to be able to share that information with you, so you don't have to do manual inspections. If you are a financial services firm and you want to be able to trade natural gas supply in the Permian Basin in Texas, you want real-time information on demand and supply flows of natural gas to have an edge on the market. These are things that we think only folks that are highly technical and understand satellite imagery can do today. And we think that there's going to be a big wave of democratizing that data. So software and kind of platforms that are downstream that help enable that are particularly interesting to us.
Yes, absolutely. And as an investor, when you're looking at these all kind of innovative companies, and I believe that you have this interest into space. So how do you look at these companies and evaluate if that's a worthy investment or not? Do you look at the tech, or do you look at the founder? What all things do you look at to make and come to a decision on them?
Ultimately, investing in space is no different in this regard, in the sense of when you're investing pre-seed and seed, you need to have conviction in the founder, the founding team, and the market that they're building in. Now, one of the advantages of being only sector focused on space is we have a really good instinct and understanding of the direction, the momentum, and the challenges of certain sectors within space. And so when we're evaluating a founder early on, their experience does matter, but only in the sense of, will it help them with what they're trying to achieve today? We invest in a lot of first-time entrepreneurs that leave SpaceX or have had other professional experience. We're very comfortable backing them. We've also backed repeat serial founders, though. What's similar in both cases, though, is we want to see, what is your technical roadmap? We want to see how feasible that is. And we also want to look for near-term commercialization. I think it's really important for companies that are building deeply technical or hardware-oriented solutions to have milestones along the way to prove near-term commercialization, whether that's through small governmental grants or whether that's through small commercial contracts. In the venture market of today, it's unlikely that a company can stay heads down and just build product for 3, 4, 5, 6 years without showing some type of commercial traction from a revenue standpoint. And so oftentimes we are talking to founders and trying to evaluate, what are those milestones? How quickly and feasible do they appear? And do we have confidence that the team can pull it off? Those are things that we zero in on pretty quickly in our first 1 or 2 meetings.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a very, very good point that you made there, the commercial viability aspect, because in deep tech industries, it is seen that for about maybe 3 to 4 years, like companies just keep on researching and building on the product, and there's not much money flowing in, right? And like you said, the VC environment right now makes it really hard to raise when your money is not coming in, you're not getting any revenue. And that makes it super important to have that aspect cleared, or at least have a forecast that this is how we're going to turn that faucet on, right? Great. Now you are also an investor in SpaceX, and you told, like at the beginning of this episode, that you visited the facility. So tell us what's special about SpaceX. Is it just about Elon Musk, or is there much more beyond that to it?
SpaceX is a once in a generation company. I think the history books will look back at SpaceX and what they've been able to accomplish really fondly, to be honest. Elon is obviously an enigma within himself. He is a once in a generation type entrepreneur. But it is definitely not just Elon, and Elon would admit this himself. Gwen Shotwell, who's the president and COO of SpaceX, is really the glue that holds a lot of that together. So while Elon may be the bold visionary, Gwen is the steady hand that helps SpaceX continue to march forward. And it is that combination of skill sets, along with the thousands of other folks at SpaceX, that really make the magic come to life. I do think SpaceX, though, is the undisputed market leader. If you just take a look at last year, 2022, there were approximately 180 rocket launches in the entire world. China, as a whole country, had 62. The Russians had about 20. The entire rest of the world combined, not including SpaceX, had 20. And then SpaceX had 61 by themselves. And I think this year they'll be close to 80, potentially even 100. And what's notable about that too is they had 61 primarily using reusable rockets, multiple boosters landing. I think we've all seen the video of the boosters coming back and landing, and without major accidents, which is insanely difficult to do in space, as you know. This is an industry that is almost proud of its failures because it helps push kind of the next iteration forward. And so SpaceX is by far the dominant leader in launch. I think it could put Starship on hold and still be the dominant leader 10 years from now. Now, Starship is a paradigm shift. For those that don't know, Starship is the largest rocket to ever be developed. It passes Saturn V in terms of thrust and payload capacity. And it essentially allows us to put much larger objects in infrastructure and a larger scale of satellites in space faster and cheaper. That's the hope. Starship has not launched yet. We're hoping for an orbital demonstration this year in the spring. I think that'll be really interesting. And I think that'll enable us to do more audacious projects in space. So, the International Space Station is going to be decommissioned. So commercial space stations, on-orbit servicing, gas stations in space. These are things that we're doing a little bit of, but I think something like Starship coming on board allows for grander, more accelerated visions of that. The last thing I might say that your listeners might be interested in terms of SpaceX is, we talked about Starlink earlier and their effort with Ukrainians and getting internet access. Starlink is one of the fastest growing segments of SpaceX, But I think Starlink and satellite communications is not a winner take all market like launch might be. Uh, think of a country like India, 1.4 billion people, 700 million don't have access to regular high quality internet. Countries are going to look for satcom to help enable a whole generation to come online, and they're going to skip the whole telephone wires and broadband layer of innovation and go straight to satcom. But I don't think this is something where a single company will be able to monopolize the market. I think every country will want their own sovereign solution. And I think, especially with Amazon Kuiper and OneWeb, and certainly Apple is sniffing around in this area as well, there's going to be a lot of commercial interest. And so we're very bullish on Starlink. The company is accelerating growth quickly. But I do think satellite communications is one of those areas where a lot of companies can be successful in this playing field.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is clearly evident that SpaceX is completely leading the way. And when I first saw that video of a rocket launching back on Earth, that was like a great moment for me. Like, okay, this is future, and Elon Musk has it's basically like he's summoning the future to right now. Okay, and another video wherein there was a rocket launch, and there were some I think it was a NASA's rocket launch, but I think they had partnered with SpaceX or something. And the space suits of the astronauts looked so cool and futuristic, and that was great to watch. That was probably the first time I watched the live, uh, streaming of that, and it was so good to see that. Okay, like things are developing, and now feels like we're living in 2022 or 2023, right? So and that's probably the greatest thing that Elon Musk is doing for all of us, that he's telling us what's possible, and dream big and go after your dreams. And it's not easy to do that. You have to have certain traits to do that. But yeah, like it's great. And another aspect I want to talk about is SpaceX always, like, the mass population knows about SpaceX because of their promise that, okay, we are going to one day get to Mars, and we are reasonably close to that. So what is your perception on that? Do you think we have the capabilities, or anywhere near close capabilities, to get us to Mars, maybe in our lifetimes?
Yes, I do think that in our lifetime, for you and I, our generation, humans will be on Mars. I actually think it might happen quicker than some folks expect, because I think the US and China are entering into a bit of a new space race, and there is a lot of geopolitical pride in being the first to put humans on Mars. That said, and I think Elon would admit this, for the foreseeable future, it is a one-way mission. And it is going to take a lot of investment and a lot of infrastructure in order to build up any type of autonomous base. I think, to be honest, for the next 10 years, really the focus is on building an autonomous base on the moon. I think that is a really good first step towards that broader vision of Mars. I think what's interesting is Elon has certainly pushed this notion of becoming a multiplanetary species, and has maybe awakened that optionality for a lot of folks that hadn't considered it. But I actually find that most people, and I don't want to speak for everyone, this is a generalization, but most people in the space ecosystem are just as motivated about using space technologies to make life on Earth here better as they are exploring what's out there. And so I think having that duality is really important. It's not about leaving Earth and everyone going to Mars. It's not about, never exploring and all staying here on Earth, but it's about leveraging the beauty of space to make life here on Earth better. And if having optionality on the moon and Mars and elsewhere is feasible, then I think that's a beautiful objective to try and swing for. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more aspect I want to talk about is, like, space is a deep tech space. It's complicated, it's complex, and you need to have a specific kind of knowledge to be able to build a company here. So, what are the biggest challenges that founders face while building in the space sector?
Truthfully, space startups are just asked to do more. Building a startup is hard in general, but if you're a space company, from day one, you need to be thinking about, as you just mentioned, very specific types of talent acquisition: propulsion specialists, structural engineers, software engineers, go to market folks that have a unique understanding of landscape. You need to think about government from day one, both from a regulatory standpoint, but also as a key customer and a partner. You need to think about capital, and the way that you use that capital much more conservatively than a software company. I'll give you an example. When I ran Jebbit, we pivoted multiple times because as we got customer feedback, we realized that our initial product maybe wasn't solving the most important problem. So we adjusted and we had the ability to do that. You can't do that in deep tech and hardware oriented, capital intensive businesses like space. It's much more difficult. And so you just have less margin for error, which is why in our diligence, we spend so much time up front really understanding how thoughtful the founder is, their experience, their vision for this, really going through the roadmap, both commercial and technical. And that's how we built our VC fund as well to help them accelerate that. So when I was running Jebbit, we raised over $90 million in venture capital over the decade. And I had the opportunity to work with about a dozen, 10 or so venture capital firms, all the way from one individual with a small amount of money all the way to, 100 billion AUM type funds. And so I saw different styles, different ways that VCs were working with founders. And when I thought about launching SpaceVC, I wanted to make sure that I took the best of those experiences that I felt as a founder was actually helpful, wasn't just lip service or wasn't just VC saying, let's be founder friendly or value add. What was actually helpful for me as I was building my business. And we crafted that for our space startups from 0 to 1 as well when they grow. So it's really around customers, access to capital, and in government relations and talent. Those are the 3 or 4 areas that we really hone in on.
Absolutely, and that's a great value add. And being a former founder, you can bring that experience in and help your founders like raise their future rounds as well. Awesome. So now talking about the future, right? So where do you see the space sector evolving in the next maybe 5 to 10 years? What's going to come up next?
My hope is that consumers and enterprises continue to rely on space more and more without realizing it. That means we've done our job from an infrastructure and integration standpoint. I think what's interesting is the Ukraine conflict also was the first modern war where venture-backed space startups played such a central role. One of our portfolio companies, Hawkeye 360, was actually the company that detected the GPS jamming that the Russians were doing, that notified the US intelligence community that they were imminently invading, meaning within a few hours. And so I think you will continue to see this role of intelligence collection be more central to national security, and not just the US, but every country in the world. Lastly, I think one area to think about, which might get your listeners excited, is this notion of on-orbit servicing. So while enterprises and consumers at the end of the day just want our insight or answer solved or just want to be connected, there's a massive opportunity for on-orbit servicing everywhere from, I'll use examples like the tow trucks of space or, the taxi cabs of space or the gas stations of space. These are all things that are really interesting in helping the LEO ecosystem flourish and survive and be more efficient. I also think space debris is an increasing challenge and something that we should focus on as an ecosystem. And I think there will be a lot of government intervention there, but I'm really excited to see some really novel use cases that entrepreneurs come up with to help mitigate and track and manage space debris. So the future is really bright for space, and we're excited to be investing in entrepreneurs building it.
Absolutely. And I love that take that I want more and more companies and the sector to evolve in a way that more people are using space technologies but aren't aware that they're using space technologies. And that is, I think, more or less the case today as well. We are all using like maybe mapping technology, Google Maps and stuff like that. We are always using that stuff, but we are not completely aware that this is actually space technology and there is probably a satellite up there that is helping me get this information on my mobile phone, right inside my pocket, right? So that is what space enables us to do, and that is at a much consumer level, right? Now moving on to our rapid fire round, which is 5 quick questions, and you have to give 5 quick answers, which is all about the fund, right? So the first one goes: what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
Globally, primarily US, and space adjacent.
Great. What's the typical stage of investment?
Early, pre-seed and seed.
What's the typical check size?
Typically anywhere from 100 to 500K.
And where can founders pitch you in case there is a direct way to pitch?
DM on Twitter, or we have a form on our website if you want to fill that out too.
Where can our listeners follow you?
Twitter is probably the best place. I'm pretty active there, and I share a lot of interesting space content of what's happening. So handle is Lacoste Jonathan.
Great. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes below. And thank you so much for making time for this. Love talking to you about space sector, space technologies. And I hope our listeners get a lot of information about how is the space sector spacing up, and the investors listening get a sense of how to invest in the space. Thank you so much for making time for this. Happy investing.
Awesome. Thank you.